Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. And pack one, pick one. I've got a pretty nice one. Midnight Reaper is a pretty strong rare, as we could see in that last game. Just a nice body, 3 mana 3/2 with a very powerful ability. That is not a drawback unless you're at 1 life. Then we've got a House Guildmage, one of the better guild mages for sure. And what else? Rampaging Monument is a decent one. It's an artifact, so it doesn't commit you to any guild from the get-go, so it keeps you a bit more flexible, but not as powerful as some of the cards like the Guildmage and the Reaper here. Then we also have a Watcher in the Mist as a great blue common, kind of like the Cloud Raider Sphinx in Dominaria. And we have a Deadly Visit as another powerful removal spell with Surveil. So those are the main considerations here in this pack. It's probably just a Midnight Reaper here. There's not a ton of ways to get ahead on cards in Limited, and Midnight Reaper is a pretty easy way to do it. Sets us up to be more of a green creature deck than a Dimir deck necessarily, but I mean it would still be okay in Dimir. But you would rather combine it with more small creatures like the Generous Tray and the Burglar Rats, so it does fit better into Golgari than it does in Dimir. But I think it's worth taking here. Potentially also still splashable, although you would prefer to be able to play it on turn 3. And then we're also passing a lot of Dimir cards, so we're likely setting up the people we're passing to be Dimir, but we're not gonna think too much about it here. Let's just take the Reaper and then hope to wheel something out of this pack. This pack is pretty stacked as well. It gives you a bit of card selection early with the Surveil, so it has Surveil synergies, and then later in the game, if the opponent is empty-handed, Dispersal can act as a nice removal spell by bouncing their biggest creature and making them discard it right away. But usually the opponent's going to be holding some lands since they're playing against a Dimir deck, so you won't be easily able to get your opponent unless you get them empty-handed some other way, like through maybe a Disinformation campaign or a Burglar Rat. Either way, we also have a Status Statue, which is a great removal spell. At 4 mana can deal with artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So very versatile, and Status is still perfectly fine as a combat trick for 1 mana. So this would be an incentive to potentially move into Golgari alongside the Midnight Reaper, which also sets us up nicely to be Golgari. There's Okran Assassin, which is great in Golgari as well, as a finisher and just as a Death Touch creature to trade early if you're behind. There's a Deadweight as an excellent removal spell for 1 mana too. So these are all the considerations. So we have to make a pretty difficult decision here, and it's going to kind of impact how the rest of the draft is going to go moving forward. I don't think it's Discovery Dispersal, just because I think I prefer Deadweight over it for the most part. And if we can be green instead of blue, that would go a little bit better with our first pick. Although typically Dimir is a bit more powerful than Golgari in draft, just because the commons are a bit better. That being said, we have a Status Statue here, which is an excellent Golgari card, and in the fail case where we do still somehow end up in a Dimir deck, Status is still castable for a single black mana, thanks to the hybrid mana cost. So the fail case isn't that bad. +1/+1 and Death Touch, we could potentially trade small creatures for something very big, or the +1/+1 could make a trade turn into a favorable block or attack for us. So I think I prefer Status Statue here over the Deadweight as well, since if we do get to Golgari, then Statue is a much better removal spell than Deadweight, and at 4 mana it's still pretty cheap. And I think I also like the Status Statue over the Okran Assassin here, although Okran Assassin would be totally reasonable as well for a Golgari deck. So yeah, interesting pack, lots of possible options, but I think I like the Status Statue here. And we get to follow it up with potentially a Kraul Harpooner if we are set on Golgari, as probably one of the better 2-drops at uncommon. There's a Thought Erasure if we do end up in Dimir, but as I've said, I think we're probably better suited to move into Golgari based on our first 2 picks. There's also a Dowser of Lights, which is totally fine, but we can probably get one later. Same with the Worm, and same with the Golgari Guildgate. Yeah, let's just take a Harpooner here. And did we get rewarded? Nah, kind of got punished a little bit. Since if we had moved into Dimir, Darkblade Agent would have been a pretty nice pick for us. So what do we take given that we did not go for Dimir? I mean, we could still easily move into Dimir by taking the Darkblade Agent here instead. But if we do want to stick to a green card, we've got a Recluse and a Beetle, which are playable cards, if a bit unexciting. Definitely prefer the Beetle over the Recluse, since at 3 mana in Golgari, we usually end up with a few generous strays that we want to be playing instead. Beetle plays pretty well with cards like Midnight Reaper, Sever Strands, since you can put this +1/+1 counter somewhere, and then the 1/1 body is still useful for other effects. Could also consider some of the mana fixing here, but I think for now we're okay taking the Beetle, committing a bit more heavily to Golgari, and hope we get some good green cards and we don't get punished for not going down the Dimir path. Alright, well, we definitely got rewarded here with a Swarm Guildmage. Even though it's one of the weaker Guildmages, it's still a powerful card if you compare it to other 2-drops. Just a 2/2 for 2 mana early, can attack and block, and then late game gives us a nice bit of utility. And other good Golgari cards in the pack too here. Dissident is one of my favorite 2-drops at common. Spinal Centipede at 3 mana is pretty good too. So lots of decent Golgari cards. Necrolisk also makes use of the 1/1 Beetle, for example, pretty well. So would also fit into our Golgari deck nicely. Plays well with a Midnight Reaper too. So yeah, pretty nice Golgari pack for us here. If we could take 4 cards out of this pack, we would happily do so. But we have to pick one, and I think Guildmage is the pick. And alright, the Golgari cards continue. So now we're pretty happy that we're Golgari over Dimir. So happy with our choice. There's a Generous Stray, which I definitely wouldn't mind. One of those disposable creatures that you can sacrifice to Sever Strands and other effects, and replaces itself, but I don't think I take it over a Rhizome Lurcher, which is kind of the payoff card for sacrificing those small creatures early. And if you top deck this late, it could potentially be a 4 mana 8/8 or even bigger, and just completely takes over the game. So let's take a Lurcher, and then hope to pick up some Generous Strays in the future. Alright, well, we've got a Pilfering Imp, which does have some synergy with the Undergrowth cards as well. If you sacrifice it, our Lurcher is going to be 1 bigger, and can potentially mess with the opponent's hand a little bit. And a 1/1 flyer for 1 mana can still trade off for an opposing Hawk from the Boros deck, for example, before it gets any +1/+1 counters. So let's take the Imp. And here we can take a Shieldmate, which is still fine as a green 2-drop. Not a fan of the Wand, even in a dedicated Undergrowth deck. I don't think it's very good. But a Shieldmate is just an okay 2-drop. You need a few of those to make your deck function. A creature that we can trade off early for Undergrowth, and if we have a Reaper in play, we get to draw some cards. So, totally fine card here. And now what? So this was our first pack where we had all those Dimir cards. We wheeled a Dimir Guildgate, a Wishcoin Crab. There's also Pax Favor as a pump spell, Silent Dart as Mopey removal. So a few options. Could even consider the Woodshaper, since in Golgari the Woodshaper is actually pretty decent. It's kind of like an upgraded Generous Stray. And if we pick up some Selesnya Guildgates, we could easily splash white and play a few of the Selesnya cards. I kind of like that more than the Pax Favor here, since even though we are a creature deck, we don't want too many pump spells, since our deck rewards us for having as many creatures as possible, between cards like the Lurcher with Undergrowth and the Reaper that wants us to play a lot of creatures. So we're just better off having more creatures and limit the number of pump spells we need. So I think I'm going to take a Speculative Woodshaper here over the Pax Favor, since usually you can get a Pax Favor pretty late in the draft, so you don't have to prioritize it. And if we take the Woodshaper and pick up 1 or 2 Guildgates, then we might be rewarded. Hey, thanks for the bits there, Castiel, appreciate it. Alright, so here we have a Golgari Locket, which I'm not too excited about. Every now and then you might play it if your curve is very high, but that doesn't seem to be the case yet. But there's nothing else in the pack for us. Take a Locket, move on. And alright, we wield a Dowser of Light as well as a Vigor Spore Worm. So 2 decent curve toppers for our deck. Not sure which one we want more. The worm can potentially get bigger, and the effect is somewhat relevant when it enters the battlefield. That being said, we don't have any 5-drops yet. This would fit our curve nicely. We've got a Guild Mage to activate in the late game. Midnight Reaper potentially draws us more cards. Woodshaper could potentially replace itself, so we can definitely use our mana in this deck pretty nicely going late. So I would be tempted to take the Dowser instead. So we don't have too many good defensive cards yet in our deck, which would be another reason to take the Dowser, because let's say we are behind on board, then most of our creatures have 2 toughness, so they don't block very well. So having something like a Dowser might be better, as it comes down earlier than the worm, has 1 more toughness, so it blocks a little bit better. Dowser tends to go in the Dimir decks pretty nicely as well, whereas a worm doesn't go in Selesnya at all, since the Selesnya deck wants to play cheap creatures and then expensive Convoke cards, so they're not too interested in a 6-drop without Convoke. So I think I'm going to take the Dowser, and then just try and get a worm later, which I think is more feasible. And I will take the Recluse. Thanks for the bits there. Alright, and we even wield Dissident and Necrolisk out of that one pack. Alright, so Necrolisk has good synergy with Midnight Reaper, with the Beetle, potentially the Imp. So it does play pretty well in Golgari. I do like me a Dissident quite a bit as well, as just a very solid 2-drop. That being said, we have quite a few 2-drops already, so we don't have to prioritize the Dissident necessarily. So I could see taking the Necrolisk here. Also pretty close pick. Alright, so the pack 1 went pretty well. Almost every single card we picked is going to make our deck. And we've got some pretty powerful cards here between Status Statue, the Guild Mage, the Midnight Reaper. So pretty happy with where we're at. And what did we open here? Not too many exciting Golgari cards, sadly. Yeah, the rares and the uncommons are not for us. We could consider splashing blue for Artful Takedown. Don't think that's where we want to be. I think we would rather splash white for more creatures like the Woodshaper, maybe a Rosemint Centaur. But there is another Rhizome Lurcher, which seems totally fine here. If we do somehow wheel Centaur or Centaur Peacemaker, and we're still trying to splash white, we could take them. But for now, we'll just take the Lurcher. And alright, another Artful Takedown. So had we been Dimir, we could have ended up with 2 Artful Takedowns here, but we've got a Lotless Giant, which is an okay curve stopper in this deck. There's also Selesnya Guildgate and Gateway Plaza as mana fixing to enable the White Splash. Probably not necessary to take it here, can probably wheel one of them, and can just take the Giant here. Giant is fine, not a super exciting card by any means, but it will win you the game if you get to the late game with enough mana and enough creatures in the graveyard, which is all you can ask for a 7-drop. Alright, well, this is a perfect card for our deck, Affectionate Indrik. 6 mana 4/4 finds an opposing creature, so kind of like a Ravenous Chupacabra, but just bigger. Crushing Canopy sometimes also makes the Golgari deck, since we're somewhat weak to flying creatures. That being said, there's also another Recluse, which does help against flyers as well. Veiled Shade would potentially make the deck. But yeah, easy Affectionate Indrik here. And this is a bit of a blank. Nightveil Sprite and Banneret, good cards, but not for us. There's a Siege Worm, which is okay. A lot better in the Selesnya decks than in the Golgari decks, but we might still play it just as another curve topper, and if we do end up with a lot of creatures, we will pretty easily be able to convoke this around turn 5. We'll take it. Alright, so here we have a very interesting pack. So Ladef Champion is by far the best card here. So I think I'm tempted to take the Ladef Champion and keep the hope of splashing white alive. Hope to wheel one of those gates out of the first pack, or I think it was the second pack. And yeah, we're also not giving up on much, since The Trooper's not a great card, so we'll just take a champion here. And what do we get? A bunch of good white cards. Luminous Bonds is great. The Patrol is great too. In pure Golgari, we've got a second Necrolisk. We've got a Bartizan Bats and a Dissident, which are all fine cards as well. A pretty tricky decision here. We could just take yet another white card, so Luminous Bonds, and try and splash even more white cards, but we are still lacking the mana fixing at the moment. So it's a bit of a speculative pick, which may or may not end up in our deck. Hopefully it does, since it is a powerful effect. On the other hand, we could just take a solid playable, which would definitely make our deck. So we probably want to take a look at our curve. Hopefully we don't have to play the lockets. So we could use some more 3s. Our late game is definitely covered, so we don't need to worry about picking up some expensive cards. I wouldn't mind a Dissident as just another cheap card we can play. The more cheap creatures we have, the more fluid our deck will play out, and the better the Undergrowth synergies get as well. Don't really need more 4-drops. So Bartizan Bats is not a high priority, since unlike the Dimir deck that tries to stall on the ground with crabs and other walls, and then flies over with a card like Bartizan Bats, the Golgari deck is more likely to be able to just take over the ground with a Rhizome Lurcher, for example. So you don't need the flyers as much, but it's still a fine card in a Golgari deck. I think we're okay taking the Luminous Bonds as kind of a speculative pick here. My second choice would probably be the Dissident over the Necrolisk, since having too many Necrolisks is not exactly where we want to be, since they do have diminishing returns. Alright, well, I guess we'll keep taking Rhizome Lurchers here. Definitely taking it over the Woodshaper, since we're not even sure we're going to play white yet. So by taking the Lurcher here, yet another reason to just prioritize cheap creatures to hope to trade off. So let's take a Lurcher number 3. And alright, we've got a decision to make. There is a Gateway Plaza, which is mana fixing. Not great mana fixing, since we have to pay 1 mana for it. So it's a lot worse than a Guildgate. The other option is a Dowser of Lights, which we already have 1 copy of. We probably would play a second one, but it's not a high priority given the other late game cards we have already. There's also Urban Utopia, which is technically mana fixing. I think we still prefer the Plaza over the Utopia though. But Plaza being a land also kind of puts the mana fixing within the mana base, so we don't have to dedicate a card out of our deck to fix our mana, which I think is better. Alright, we did wheel both the Rosemane Centaur and the Centaur Peacemaker. So 2 other considerations as well. We don't have many 1-drops, so it's gonna be played on turn 4 instead of turn 3, since we don't really have the means to be able to cast a Centaur on turn 3 reliably. And if we're playing this on turn 4, we already have a bunch of 4-drops, of course. Rhizome Lurcher, not the type of card you often want to play on turn 4, since it gets much better in the late game. So we could even consider the Centaur Peacemaker instead of it, but it's not a great splash card, whereas the Centaur is potentially still castable through Convoke if we have a Shieldmate in play, which can tap for white mana. So that's another way to kind of cheat the Centaur into play if we don't have a Plains or a Guildgate in play. So I think we're okay taking the Centaur, but there's a chance we don't end up playing it. Alright, and there's a Selesnya Guildgate, perfect. Definitely taking it here over anything else. We might play a Knock-Copy just as a 3-drop that trades off frequently, but I think we much prefer the Guildgate here, make sure we can cast our powerful white cards. And we wield both a Canopy and a Recluse, so we could use the effect from Canopy, since our deck can be somewhat vulnerable to flying creatures, but the Recluse would also help us there, plus it's a creature for all the creature synergies we have in our deck. Not sure which is more important here. There are some flyers that the Recluse doesn't deal with all that well, but most of the commons can get blocked by the Recluse. I think we'll probably still go with the Canopy, since I doubt we'll play 2 copies of Hitchcrawl Recluse in our deck, but there's also a chance we don't end up playing the Canopy. Alright, this big doesn't matter. And a Pause for Reflection, I don't think we'll need that one. Alright, so going into pack 3, what are we hoping for? Maybe a few extra shield mates. Could use a bit more removal in black. Another deadweight would be great. Our late game, I think, looks okay. Could use a bit more mana fixing to make sure we can cast our white spells in time. And some more creatures that replace themselves, like the Generous Stray would be great. Burglar Rat would be good too. And maybe a Sever Strands or two as removal to sacrifice those cheap creatures. Alright, well, we did open a Generous Stray. We also opened Deadly Visit, Sever Strands, Hatchery Spider, Undercity Uprising even, Necrotic Wound. So this pack is quite stacked for us, so it's going to be difficult to decide. As we mentioned earlier, our late game already looks decent, so taking another 7-drop might not be the best idea, even though Spider can be a nice curve topper in Golgari. Generous Stray would be a nice addition too, but I don't think we're taking it over something like a Deadly Visit or Spider here. Necrotic Wound has good synergy as well if we end up with enough creatures that go to the graveyard. Sever Strands would be good if we end up with more cards like Generous Stray. Same with the Uprising, these cards are pretty similar. I think I'm tempted to take the Deadly Visit over the Spider here, since looking at our late game we already have a bunch of 6-7 drops. So adding another one doesn't necessarily improve the deck all that much, since we can't play all of them. And this is essentially just a 5-7 reach. The other text on the Spider might as well not be there, since you are unlikely to hit anything with it. So I think our deck just needs the Deadly Visit more, since we're a bit lacking in the removal department. Surveil too, pretty good in our deck as well, since it can make our Undergrowth cards a bit better. Yeah, let's just take the Deadly Visit here, and then hope to wheel Generous Stray, Sever Strands, or Uprising. Or Necrotic Wound, but I doubt that one will still be there. Alright, well, this pack is pretty stacked as well. Price of Fame and Izoni. Two great cards in our deck. They're kind of the better versions of the previous pack. Price of Fame an improvement over Deadly Visits, and Izoni a very big improvement over Hatchery Spider. But yeah, I don't think we can pass up on an Izoni, since this kind of wins the game by itself. But we would definitely love a Price of Fame as well here. Gorgon would definitely make the deck as well. But yeah, Izoni it is. And alright, why not? Second Crawl Harpooner, there's also Pelt Collector, Centipede, Lurcher, Beetle, so another very stacked Golgari pack. But yeah, I don't think we want another Lurcher, since otherwise we are going to run into the situation too often where Lurchers are only turn 4 play, and there's no creatures in the graveyard, so it's just going to be a 4-mana 2/2, which is pretty underwhelming. So it's definitely not the Lurcher. Between Harpooner and Beetle, I prefer Harpooner. So now the question is, do we want Harpooner or Pelt Collector? I think we prefer the Harpooner here. We're not a super aggressive beatdown deck where Pelt Collector is going to shine, even though Pelt Collector's still going to be good in our deck. It's also a cheap creature for Convoke for cards like Rosemane Centaur. But Harpooner also gives us an extra card against flying creatures, which again Golgari can be weak against, so we can afford to cut the Canopy, for example, and just have 2 Harpooners, maybe a Recluse. Also tends to trade more often, which is good, since it sets up our Undergrowth synergies nicely. Pelt Collector potentially has more upside, but the fail case is a lot worse than a Harpooner. And I think we just want to make our deck more consistent, since the power level is definitely there with cards like Izoni. We don't need to get lucky with a Pelt Collector. I think we can afford to take the better card on the average case scenario. So let's take the Harpooner. Alright. I'm pretty happy with just a Golgari Guildgate here. There's also Dawn of Hope, which is another card we could potentially splash. But again, I don't know if we need to, since it's not the best splash card necessarily, since we might only be able to make 1 token a turn in the late game. But it is a powerful engine card. So if we were lacking in the late game department, this is definitely a card we could consider. Given that our late game also already looks pretty good here, I don't think we want a Dawn of Hope on the splash, which can be a little awkward, since we don't get to play it early. Whereas a Guildgate just improves our mana base. Could also consider a Centipede over the Guildgate, since if we actually look at our deck, we don't have that many 3-drops. So it might actually be Centipede over Guildgate, although I definitely wouldn't mind Golgari Guildgate here. I think we actually lean towards Centipede here over the Guildgate, since I've got a feeling Guildgate's more likely to wheel, since Golgari seemed pretty open the entire draft. And I think we just want to increase the number of creatures we have in our deck to make sure everything functions according to plan. Alright, and now we can take a Golgari Guildgate potentially. Let's take a quick look at the rest of the pack. There is also second Woodshaper, but I don't think we need it. We already have enough value cards. And I don't want to make the white splash too big and too heavy on the mana base. Guildgate just improves our mana base quite a bit. I do like it over the Utopia here, for sure. And don't need another Locket, so... Alright, Guildgate it is. And now we can consider something like an Undercity Uprising. There's also Pax Favor as a pump spell, which we don't have, but again, we don't have to prioritize. I don't think we'll end up playing the Centaur. And we might not play the Siege Worm. Uprising seems pretty nice with some of our cheap creatures, like the Iron Shell Beetle, for example. So that can kill something big, but we also have pretty large creatures ourselves, so we could just fight with one of our bigger creatures as well. Helps us put more creatures in the graveyard for our Undergrowth synergies. Seems okay here. We're also still hoping to wield that Generous Stray out of one of the early packs, which would be a nice combo with it as well. And wow, that's a late Belt Collector, not the same one we opened earlier. It's a different one. There's also Guildgate and Plaza, Prey Upon, so lots of considerations. It might just be the Belt Collector, but the other cards have some merit as well. Alright, and we got a Generous Stray now. Over Guildgate, over Prey Upon. Prey Upon and Guildgate are okay too, but now that we just picked up an Undercity Uprising, Prey Upon's not that important anymore. And the fact that it costs 1 mana is nice, but it's not like you're gonna play it on turn 1 or 2. We already have 1 Selesnya Guildgate and a Gateway Plaza for white mana fixing. If we add a Plains on top, we'll have 3 white sources, which is probably enough for the Champion, Bonds, and Woodshaper potentially. Could also easily cut the Woodshaper and just splash for Champion and Luminous Bonds, in which case 3 white sources should be enough. Definitely would appreciate the Generous Stray here, I think. Just as a nice card that replaces itself, an extra cheap creature that ends up in the graveyard. Plays well with cards like the Uprising that we just picked up. Alright, and we also wield the other Generous Stray. There's also second Uprising. And then we might just cut the Woodshaper, as they're pretty similar. And then, I mean, we could even consider not playing the white, since our Golgari cards by themselves look pretty strong. But Luminous Bonds and Champion are definitely above average cards that might be worth splashing for. So let's take another Generous Stray. And don't think this pick is gonna matter. Don't think we're playing a Veiled Shade. Could potentially play Divine just as a cheap creature that we can also sacrifice to enable our Undergrowth synergies. Might actually be okay. It's definitely not an exciting card, but does kind of cycle, even if it's pretty slow at doing so. Realistically, we're probably not gonna play it, but it does play well with the Reaper, plays well with all the Lurchers we have. Not the best combo with Undercity Uprising. Yeah, the 3-drop slot seems pretty full already. Don't think Shade would replace anything we have. So I think I'll just take Divine on the off chance that we end up playing it. Alright, pretty happy with another Beetle here. Definitely taking it over second Vine. Question is, do we take it over Pax Favor? I don't think our deck needs a Pax Favor. Again, our game plan is just to trade off creatures early as much as possible, and in a late game try and take over with a big Rhizome Lurcher, Izoni. We've got Indrik that can clear a path. Giant can also just kill the opponent on the spot. We've got our Guild Mage that can also make it easier to attack if there's a ground stall. So we have ways to win the late game, so I don't think we need Pax Favor just to make a profitable exchange on the ground. Alright, not gonna play the Saratok, but might as well take it here. Alright, so our deck came together nicely. Don't think we'll need the Utopia, so I'll just take the uncommon for the Vault. Alright. The first decision we have to make is whether or not we play the white cards. I think we would only be playing Luminous Bonds and LeGenVD Champion. We have Celestia Guildgate, Gateway Plaza, and we would probably play one Plains to support it. And looks like the majority prefers to just stick to Golgari. Alright, I mean, it's definitely a close decision since these cards are quite good, but by not having the white we improve our consistency a little bit. Yeah, we probably have the power level that we don't need Champion and Luminous Bonds. But if this is, for example, a best of 3 situation, you could easily kind of decide whether or not the white is necessary based on how fast or slow the opponent is. If they're on a very aggressive deck, you might not want to durdle around with the white splash. If they're on a more controlling deck, you might just want the extra power level that the white cards bring. But given that we're best of 1, I could see just hedging towards having a bit of a leaner deck that doesn't get into any mana troubles. So, now that we cut some of the white cards, let's see if there's anything in the sideboard that we may have missed that we might want to add back into the deck. So, Crushing Canopy, potential consideration. Siege Worm, potential consideration. And that's about it. We're probably just going to play 17 lands here. We do have a bit of card draw with the Generous Trays and the Midnight Reaper. So we don't need to play 18 lands just because we have a few expensive cards in our deck, I don't think. We also have a little bit of Surveil with the Deadly Visit to help us draw more lands if we need them. So that means we need to make 4 cuts. And what cards are on the cutting block here? So let's make a separate pile. So Divine's cuttable, Imp is cuttable. Recluse and Canopy are cuttable. I don't think we want to cut Uprising. Dowster's cuttable. Giant and Siege Worm are also cuttable. I think this is the core of the deck that we don't want to mess with too much. And yeah, that leaves us 4 cards out of these 7 will need to get cut. We'll get to keep 3 of them. The one that got the most votes was the Giant, so that one stays for sure. Then the Imp also got a few numbers of votes, so that one can probably stay as well. And then the Worm was the next best one. So right now that would mean Vine, Recluse, Canopy, and Dowster get cut. I can get behind that. Do have a bit of a spike above 5 mana in terms of mana costs. So the Dowster would be a little bit better in terms of curve, but I guess Siege Worm we will often be able to cast on turn 5 anyway, so it kind of is a bigger, better version of the Dowster of Lights in those circumstances. So yeah, this looks okay to me. So that would leave 17 lands and then 23 actual cards. Curve looks pretty decent. Got a fair bit of undergrowth synergies as well. Not too much removal, so that's the main concern. But we also have cards like Pilfering Imp, that's our pseudo removal. Harpooner could potentially take out a flyer as well. Guildmage can provide a bit of evasion. Status Statue as an actual removal spell, Uprising as well. Deadly Visit and Endrick, so yeah, we should have enough tools here to make sure we don't die. And the last thing we have to do is take a look at our mana distribution, so we definitely have more green than black, but we do have a card like Izoni that's double black, so we do want to make sure we have enough black to be able to cast everything. Here I would be tempted to go 7 swamps, 9 forests, just to have a little bit more green, so we can more consistently cast our beetles, harpooners, and generous trays early. Yeah, this looks okay. Do need double black for Deadly Visits, but hopefully we'll be able to get there in time. Alright, let's go. Alright, this hand looks good. Have to decide which 2-drop to lead with here. There's definitely some upside to sometimes keeping Harpooner. We're up against an Izzet deck. You never know, they could play like a Wheat Dragonauts or a Nightveil Sprite next turn, which we could potentially shoot down with Harpooner. So already an interesting decision here. Could also now just play the Shieldmate too, I guess. I think I'm okay playing the Shieldmate before Harpooner or Beetle. Even though it doesn't hit as hard, there's a good chance we get some value from keeping Harpooner in hand. And we're not really an aggro deck, we're trying to play a somewhat grindy long game as well. Alright, there's a Giant. So now we can just play the Beetle, put a counter on the Shieldmate, attack for 3. That seems pretty good to me. So land for Genestray would be nice here, but we can cast some spells in the meantime. Alright, so let's try and figure out if our opponent's on the more aggressive end of the spectrum or if they're somewhat more controlling Izzet deck. They are going to attack with the Mesmerists, shrinking down the Beetle. So this does represent something like a Sure Strike to attack into our Shieldmate. Could also easily be a bluff, which is definitely possible, but we're currently winning the race with the Shieldmate, so I don't think we have to risk blocking and getting got by a Sure Strike. So I think we're okay just taking 2 for now. There's not too many 3-drops that would stonewall the Shieldmate. Alright, looks like we're just gonna attack for 3. And probably just play the Harpooner here. My guess is that they probably don't have a cheap flyer at this point. So we'll just play the Harpooner, make sure we don't fall too far behind on board. For mana. And it's going to be a fresh face recruit. Their opponent appears to be on a more aggressive side of the spectrum here. I guess attacking with the Shieldmate maybe is not the best idea, since they can just double block Adapt plus a 2-1. We would only kill 1 creature, plus we also suspect they have a Sure Strike in hand. So that means that we would just trade Shieldmate for a Sure Strike, which we maybe don't want to do. And don't really want to trade Harpooner for a 2-1 here necessarily. Even though we have the Undergrowth synergies, don't have a Rhizome Lurcher in hand currently. Alright, so I don't think we're attacking, and that leaves the question, do we play Genestray or Centipede? I think we play Genestray just to try and hit our land drops. And a 3-2 wouldn't really change the board too much. And there's a land, perfect, so Undersea the Uprising next turn could do some work as well. So hopefully they just tap out for something nice that we can kill with Uprising. Instead they decide to pass a turn, and Midnight Reaper's quite the draw. So a lot of options this turn. I don't think we want to play the Uprising into 5 open mana. If the opponent has a Apothesizzle, they can just kill the creature we target with the Uprising in response, and we would end up not doing much. I think we want to probably just play the Centipede first, just to maybe bait out a removal spell or a counter spell before we deploy the Reaper, since we would much rather keep the Reaper around for a bit longer. And we're not in a hurry, our opponent's not pressuring us here. Alright, Centipede resolves. No attacks for now. But if our opponent ever taps out, we can either Uprising or Reaper, maybe Deadly Visits if we draw land. Alright, opponent just says go. Could again play Reaper, attack with maybe Shieldmate and Centipede, make some trades, draw some cards in the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they counter or kill the Reaper before anything of that happens. What's the other option? Still don't like the Uprising here, so the other option would be just to play Harpooner and potentially not make any attacks. I think I'm just going to play another Harpooner and then next turn go for an all-out attack. And as long as we keep building up our board, our opponent's going to fall further and further behind on board, and eventually that's going to come back to bite them. Opponent says go once again. So what do we suspect they have in hand at this point? Who knows? So now that we have 5 mana, we could also deadly visit, but don't really want to deadly visit anything they have in play currently. The problem with Uprising is that if their hand is a removal spell and a counter spell, they can just use a removal spell instead of the counter spell to counter the Uprising's effect. So that's not going to be a successful way of baiting out a counter spell for clearing a path for the Midnight Reaper, which is a card we actually want to resolve. Since if this resolves and it trades for a removal spell, we at least get to draw a card from it. So I think at the end of the day we're just going to play a Reaper and then attack with a bunch of creatures and see what happens. Alright, Reaper resolved, that's good. And I think we send in all these. Could also send in the Generous Ray, I guess. And how do we get punished? Opponent could have a Whisper Agent as well as a Flash Blocker. Can't think of too many things. Yeah, I think this is fine. Yeah, we don't really get punished too badly for creatures just die here. We're still at 18, so we can afford to lose some life. Invents, alright. Maybe they have another invert invent that they want to use for 1 mana to switch power and toughness. So let's see what they go get. It's going to be Expansion, Explosion, and Selective Snare. Alright. Let's look at our creature types. Soldier, Insect Warrior, Cat, Insect, Zombie Knight, Insect. I guess we do have 4 insects. 2 harpooners. The beetle and the centipede. I think we are probably better off killing the adept. And then the counter from the centipede doesn't want to go on an insect, so my guess is the Generous Ray. Draw a bunch of cards. Play an imp. Alright. I think we'll be okay. Sure, they get to bounce some insects if they want to, but it's not like they're killing them. So we could have decided between killing Recruit and leaving the 1-3 in play, but by killing the 1-3 now the beetle could potentially get in there as well. Killing the 2-1 instead of the 1-3 opens up an attack with the Midnight Reaper, but I suspect the Reaper's gonna die here to the explosion anyway. So opponent's down to 7, facing quite a board. They can buy themselves a bit of time with the Snare. Instead it's gonna be a Cosmotronic Wave. Alright, that's gonna kill a few of our things. But also gonna draw us a bunch of cards. So if their plan was to kill the Reaper, they probably should have killed it before casting the wave. Unless they've got a second wave. Maybe they wanted to copy it with Expansion Explosion, but they forgot to. Since, yeah, then they could have killed the Harpooners and the Reaper as well if they copied it with Expansion. So maybe that was their plan, but they messed it up. Or they just have a second wave in hand. Either way, this Rhizome Lurcher's looking pretty good. And now a Selective Snare. Works for me. So, now we can play a Lurcher plus a Harpooner after we attack for 5. Could also Deadly Visit, put them to 2. I guess then we can't do anything else. Could also Undercity the Uprising here, killing the Recruit. So a lot of options. I think we're fine attacking with both. And then just going Harpooner plus Lurcher. Yeah, we're 1 mana short of Giant, which also just kills them, so... Definitely want to attack first before playing the Lurcher, since the Reaper's likely to die. Alright, so we're at 13. Don't think they can burn us out with Expansion Explosion quite yet. And now the Reaper's gone. Erratic Cyclops. And a concession. Alright, sweet. Well, definitely got to see Midnight Reaper in action there, drawing us a million cards. Opponent probably messed up that one turn. They maybe were trying to set up Cosmotronic Wave plus Expansion to copy it. Or they missed it, and they only realized when it was too late. Alright. On the draw, I think we can keep this. Just need to draw a single Swamp to turn on the entire hand pretty much. And a 2-2 Beetle in the meantime to trade off. Alright, turn 1 Belt Collector. Not the best combo with the Beetle sadly, since if we play Beetle is only going to count as a 1/1 creature for Pelt Collector. Now we can just play Harpooner attack with the Pelt Collector. Opponent's probably going to trade, but it's not like the Pelt Collector is going to grow anytime soon, so I think we're fine just playing Harpooner and pumping Collector here. Even though we are once again up against an Izzet deck, which might have some flyers that the Harpooner could have killed otherwise. And there's a Swamp right on time. Alright, so now we can go Imp plus Beetle, or we can play the Reaper right now. Kind of leaning towards Imp plus Beetle, and making Harpooner 3 toughness means that it survives direct currents, but it still dies to the Silent Dart, which is in play. And we don't really want to play the Reaper when the Silent Dart is still in play, so we could also not put the +1/+1 counter on the Harpooner, and instead just put it on the Beetle itself, make it 2/2. Not entirely sure. I think I will make a 2/2 Beetle. Could also make a 2/2 Flyer, but there's a chance we actually want to sacrifice the Imp. I think I just want to spread out the wealth a little bit more. They might still be tempted to use a Silent Dart on Harpooner or the Imp here anyway, if they want to protect something. And that's what they are doing, so they've got something juicy in there that they want to protect. And now we get to play a Reaper. I guess we could have attacked with both creatures and then played a Reaper on defense to bluff a pump spell maybe. Alright, so now we can attack with everyone, play a 4/4 Lurcher. Seems fine. So they can prevent quite a bit of damage here. Alright, 4/4 Lurcher, not the biggest it can be, but still reasonable. Got our opponent down to 11, so hopefully that puts them in a more defensive stance. So we can get to the late game where we can cast our Indrik that's in hand. Alright, opponent's gonna say go. I think we just run it back, attack with everyone. Could also decide not to attack with the Reaper. The thing is, we have a Midnight Reaper in place, so even if some trades happen, we still get to replace every card that dies. Plus, we also get to play a bigger Lurcher this turn. So I think it's still reasonable to attack with everyone, even though there's a risk we end up losing 2 creatures and the opponent doesn't. I guess a worst case scenario would be maybe a removal spell on the Reaper before blocks. Alright, it's just a radical idea, so do still get in for 7 here, which is quite a lot. Get to draw 2 and play a 6/6 Lurcher at the very least. And a Lothless Giant is eventually gonna kill them by itself. Alright, so opponent had a nice instant there, but I think we're still okay. Opponent's not gonna be able to attack us back anytime soon, since they're at 4, and that gives us time to set up the Giant and the Indrik. So pretty interesting game here. Reaper definitely changes the texture of the game, since it allows you to be a lot more aggressive than normal. Could just attack with everyone. They radical idea, pump Cyclops, have a good block on the Harpooner. Indrik would not be enough to finish off the Cyclops. Could pre-combat play Indrik to kill the Urchin, potentially. They might have something to mess with it. I don't mind going for it here. They've got 3 cards in hand. Not entirely sure if they're on the more controlling spectrum or not, so they could easily still have a counterspell in hand. But I think we go for it here, since if this works, the game's over. And if they have a counterspell, then we are more likely to resolve the Giant, which wins the game by itself as well, so. Alright, Disdainful Stroke. Pumps the Urchin. Although I guess then they still have a radical idea, which makes Urchin up to a 3/3. Cyclops up to a 4/8. So they would eat one Lurcher, but have to chump block with Urchin. Is that a trade we're okay with? I guess at the same time we could also attack with a Harpooner, but putting them to 1 doesn't really matter when our plan is the Giant anyway. So we might be okay chilling, and then next turn try again. Don't really want to trade our Lurcher here, since if we wait then Cyclops loses 2 power, and they might not have another instant for next turn, which means that the 4/4 Lurcher doesn't die if it attacks next turn. Opponent plays a land, says go, another Lurcher. Alright, now I'm definitely fine making a more aggressive attack, since any trades that happen are fine. And they don't have the guaranteed instant like they had last turn to pump up their creatures. So is it going to be a chump or do they have something? Either way we can go Harpooner plus Lurcher, which is perfect here, and then still have our win the game card in hand. What's up with all these people drafting Expansion Explosion here? Alright, fair enough. Alright. Big enough to attack past the Cyclops. Opponent says go. Still no land. Think we're fine sending everyone here. Alright, Sonic Assault to tap down Lurcher. So I guess we don't really want to trade Harpooner in this instance, so no attacks. They get to buy a bit of time, but if we ever draw land, they're dead if they don't have a counterspell. Alright, I guess we can keep the land in hand for now. You never know, they could go swamp into a discard effect. But the Stray is lethal by itself as well, so just adding a 1/2 to the board is actually quite relevant. So let's move to combat. They're gonna Sonic Assault. And then we'll go from there. Alright. So they've got 2 cards in hand. They need a removal spell plus a counter spell here, so I can't imagine they have both. So even if they have another instant speed interactive spell, they would die to the Giant unless their hand is exactly like a bounce spell plus a counter spell. Alright, Dazzling Lights, their opponent gave us the BM GGs. Alright, so, well, hopefully their last card is not a counterspell and this Giant punishes them for the GGs. There we go. I mean, I would have attacked her regardless if they gave us a GGs or not. Alright, so we're 2-0 with Golgari, good stuff, and so far I think we're okay with the deck as is. I don't think I want to make any changes. Could consider going up to 8 swamps, 8 forests. Don't know if that's necessary. Let's run it back. And, well, I've got a nice hand with no black mana in it. That being said, we do have a Beetle. With a single black source we get to also cast an Imp and sacrifice it. We are on the play, so mulliganing gets a bit sketchy since we're down a card. This is probably a mulligan, since, I mean, these cards are pretty dead for the time being. So we're essentially working with 5 cards. Alright, this is better. And yeah, I'll keep a Deadly Visit on top. It's probably good enough. Might be up against an aggressive Boros deck. Hopefully the Beetle can hold down the fort in the early turns. Alright, so far so good. Not interested in racing here. Every point of life we have is more important than every damage we can deal. Stalwart's definitely annoying since that can mantra up the Marshal, but then we might just trade Beetle for Marshal. Alright, so they did hit their third land drop. And they're just attacking with the Stalwart, so they're not interested in trading Marshal for Beetle. And it's going to be a Legion Guildmage, alright. So we do have land 5, and then Deadly Visit likely hits us, or 6th land for the Indrik. So we probably just want to kill the higher impact creature here, which right now is a Stalwart over the Guildmage. And then next turn we can Indrik the Guildmage. I think that's okay. I think I like that more than playing a Beetle, since these creatures are definitely scarier than they look like. Despite being 2-drops, they can inflict quite a bit of damage. So I think we're okay going with the Deadly Visit just to try and set up our land drop for the Indrik. The Boros deck doesn't have too many expensive creatures we need to save the Deadly Visit for. Alright, Golgari, Guildgate, Pelt Collector. That's an awkward combination of cards. Pelt Collector could be okay, given the 2 expensive cards we have in hand. But I think we just bottom both, that way if we draw a spell it's probably more impactful than a Pelt Collector, and if we draw an untapped land we can cast our Indrik. And then stay back with the Beetle. But now both lands and spells are good top decks, so that's a good place to be in. We're gonna tap down the Beetle to get in for 1. Works for me. And there's a land, so let's just kill the Guildmage. And get in for 2. Now I'm definitely okay attacking. Alright. And now we just want to close out the game as soon as possible before our opponent manages to deploy their hand. Looks like they have a Color the Culprit, not a card you see in every Boros deck. I've been cutting it for most of my own Boros decks just because the green decks are not very popular in draft, so you don't end up facing a lot of big creatures. But pretty effective here. So let's just play Beetle, pumping the first Beetle. Still an effective blocker for the Marshal. And a Harpooner as well. Right, so we're still in a pretty good spot here, I would say. A land lets us play Giants, and everything that's not a land is a relevant spell, hopefully. They seem pretty protective of their Haza Marshal early, so that probably implies that they are a bit of a lower curve deck. So the fact that they're already on 5 lands should be a good sign for us. Otherwise they wouldn't really care about preserving the Marshal as much, and they would have just attacked with the 2/2 Mentor creature earlier to trade the Marshal for the Beetle. We did find a land, so let's send everyone and then play Giant afterwards. They might have a Sure Strike here or a Righteous Blow. Alright. Just a chum block. Don't think we need to play around any sweeper effects since Clarion kills the small stuff, so we don't get punished for playing the Giant. And another Colored Culprit or the rare version that deals with multiple 4 toughness creatures or greater only kills a Giant, so... Opponent on 6 mana. And they'll need multiple things here. And they don't have it. Alright, sweet. Well, we mulligan down to 6, but our opponent had a pretty weak draw themselves. They missed a few land drops and then they flooded out a bit. Who knows what they were holding. But yeah, so far the Giant seems like a nice addition to our deck, just as that last curve topper we need to close out the game. Alright. This hand's missing black mana as well, but we are on a draw. So we're pretty likely to find a black source by turn 3 on the draw. If we don't find one, then we're definitely in trouble. But we do also have a lot of green 2-drops that we can play with the 2 forests we have. The Beetles, the Harpooners, the shield mate. It's close, but I could see mulliganing. Alright, this hand's definitely better. And a Lurcher, yeah, I think we can keep a Lurcher on top. It's not a perfect draw necessarily, but Generous Trade likely to trade off Reaper, probably dies on the spot. And then we'll have a 4/4 Lurcher at least. Yeah, probably if we didn't have one of those 2 6-drops in hand, it would be an easier hand to keep. Let's play a Beetle. So next turn we'll have to decide which 3-drop to lead with. Alright, the first appearance of Status Statue. So we could potentially cast it if they block with a Recluse. Don't think we want to waste a removal spell on a 1/4 reach. So I think we would rather just hit our land drops for now. It's not like the Reaper can attack past the Recluse to deal a ton of damage. Alright, land is good. And then the next turn we have a few options between Status Statue, Midnight Reaper. Probably don't want to play a 2/2 Lurcher, so we'll have to take our time. Opponent on a Celestia deck. And a Siege Worm, which we're actually pretty close to casting here. So here we can just play a Reaper. And the nice thing about Reaper against the Celestia deck is that one of their common removal spells, Luminous Bonds, is not actually a great answer to Midnight Reaper, since we still get the effect while it's in play. And yeah, next turn we will be able to cast a Siege Worm, even if we don't draw land. Ladev Guardian is okay. Anything else? We also have Status at the ready here, just in case. Gurt for battle, alright. Opponent going on the beatdown plan. Well, I think we just take it here. We could block their Generous Trade with our Generous Trade and our Beetle. They would get to kill our Beetle, we draw a card. We could also trade Status by pumping up a Reaper, killing the Recluse. But I'm still thinking we want to keep Status Statue to deal with something bigger. I mean, I guess we're pretty likely to draw land between our draw step and the draw from the Midnight Reaper to still be able to play Siege Worm. So I guess it's still probably fine to double block their Generous Trade here. So yeah, I'm gonna hold on to Status Statue to deal with something scarier. And then hopefully we get to draw at least one land here with our 2 draw steps. Imp, not quite good enough. And a Generous Trade. Alright, I mean, still fine. Get to double spell here. And a land. So we still get to keep up status, which could be useful as well. Just pass a turn. And any trades that happen here is great for us, since then we get to play a bigger Rhizome Lurcher. So don't mind our position. Alright, opponent's got their own Siege Worm. That one we are interested in killing. Or we could just play our own Siege Worm and trade, which is maybe even better. Could also sacrifice the Imp with a Reaper in play. That's pretty spicy as well. Yeah, I think I'll take 2. Alright. So now we also have the option of playing an Indrik, which can kill the Ladev Guardian. Is that better than playing a Siege Worm right now? Maybe not. What happens if we sacrifice the Imp? We'll still have 4 mana plus 3 creatures, so we could sack Imp and play Siege Worm. Maybe that's the ideal play here. Let's say their last card is a removal spell, we can take it with Imp and then still play Siege Worm, and then Siege Worm holds the fort pretty well. If they offer to trade with Siege Worms, we can consider it. And their last card is Sprouting Renewal. Not the best, not the worst. Play a big worm. I think it's still better than anything else here. And then our opponent will have an interesting decision. They could try and push a little bit of damage by attacking with everyone, but then they're throwing away Recluse, just to get in a bit of extra damage with their Siege Worm. Or they could just offer the trade for Siege Worms, but I think that favors us given the Midnight Reaper in play. And then we get to keep Status Statue for something bigger. And in the meantime we get to play an Indrik, which also kills the Guardian. So I think we'll be fine here. And again, with every trade that happens, our lurchers get better. So let's give Ladef Guardian a hug. And pass the turn. Loxodon was a pretty decent draw for them here. But nothing we can't handle. Could attack with our Indrik, opponent probably takes it. And then what? Get to play a 5/5 Lurcher, as well as a Harpooner. We kind of want to get Lurcher up to 6/6, so we might actually consider attacking with both Generous Strays and the Indrik. If they chump or if they block a Stray, then our Lurcher's one bigger and it actually has good blocks and attacks as well. Plus we could always decide to status on one of the Generous Strays if we want to kill the Loxodon. But we might be better off just keeping Status Statue in hand, just in case. Yeah, opponent lets all the damage through. Alright. So they're respecting a pump spell here. And then we'll just play Lurcher plus Harpooner, I think. And still keep up status, which is still pretty decent here. So the Loxodon can't really attack, a Recluse can't really attack either. And we love gaining some life here, since that means we get to draw extra cards with our Midnight Reaper. We still have our Izoni in our deck, which gives us some nice inevitability as well. Alright. And keeping status now with the Lurcher means that if our opponent tries to double block, we still get to kill multiple creatures potentially. If we make the Lurcher up to a 6/6, is that better than making Indrik up to a 5/5? I think so, since otherwise I can just block with a Recluse. So I think we go for it. Beetle, Lurcher up to 6/6. They're likely to double block, and then we've got Status Statue at the ready. But I'm not gonna send in the Indrik, since that just gets blocked by the Recluse. Alright, they're gonna also throw the Witness in front, so now killing the Loxodon is still fine. Could also give Death Touch, but then we still lose our Lurcher, whereas if we just statue the Loxodon, we get to kill both of their creatures that are blocking, and they're left with a Recluse and a token. Seems good. And yeah, that's why instant speed, unconditional removal like statue is so powerful. And people also aren't really used to playing against it, since it's an uncommon in a guild that's not drafted very heavily. And our opponent has seen enough. Alright, that was quite a beating. Again on the mulligan, but Midnight Reaper helped us make up for the lost card advantage pretty easily. Sweet, so we're 4-0 now, I believe, yep. So still didn't get to cast our Izoni, but we have drawn our Midnight Reaper a fair share, so we've been getting pretty lucky there. Alright, this is a Snapkeep. Generous Stray plus Reaper, we've got our Izoni in hand. Just need to hit our land drops, and Uprising plus Generous Stray is a nice combo too. Alright, opponent on Dimir. And a Child of Night. That's okay. Lands are good. So next turn we could just play the Necrolisk. No attacks. If we wanted to play around Disdainful Stroke, we could play anything other than the Necrolisk, like the Beetle or the Reaper. So that's also a consideration here. I think we're fine if this gets countered though, since we need to get the Disdainful Stroke out of their hand at some point. And we've got a lot of better cards than a Necrolisk here. Alright, Necrolisk resolves. And a Whisper Agent, that's fine. So they've got a 3/3 Phantasm now. Attacking with the Agent. So next turn we could potentially play a Reaper plus sacrifice a creature to the Necrolisk to draw a card. Don't think we block. Against Dimir, our life total is not going to be under too much pressure. Opponent does now have double blue, so they could potentially have a Sinister Sabotage in hand. Could also just tap out for a Siege Worm, which it would be kind of bad if they counter it, since then we get attacked back for 5 and they gain 2. Can Reaper plus Beetle. Yeah, the problem with going Reaper plus sacrifice a generous trade is that then the Child of Night can attack well into the Necrolisk unless we keep the Necrolisk on defense, which is also reasonable, since it blocks the Whisper Agent pretty well. So yeah, we either go Reaper, sack Generous Trade, keep Necrolisk on defense, or we go Midnight Reaper plus Beetle, or we go Siege Worm. Siege Worm is the worst option in the face of a counterspell. So I think we go Reaper first, see what happens. Alright, they do have a Devious Cover-Up instead. So Reaper gets exiled, which is unfortunate, since now we can't get it, or it doesn't count for Undergrowth synergies. Don't think we're attacking, and then we can just Beetle, put a counter on the Necrolisk itself, I think. Rhizome Lurcher, not looking too hot right now. So what happens if we sacrifice a bunch of stuff to our Necrolisk? If they have Artful Takedown, they can kill it in response to the first activation, and we don't get to respond with the second one, since we can only use it at sorcery speed. So we could just tap out for a Siege Worm as well, which is probably fine. Yeah, I think we just play Siege Worm and don't bother attacking here. They don't seem to be holding any other instants at the moment, at least. Deadly Visit on the Worm, that's okay. Necrolisk still holding the fort on the ground. Phantasm's gonna be an issue in a turn, so we might have to deal with it using the Uprising. But what we could do is sacrifice a Beetle to the Necrolisk and then Uprising with the Necrolisk. So that could be an interesting play. So we sank the Beetle to the Necrolisk. Necrolisk's a 5/5 with Menace, and then we can Uprising, killing the Phantasm. And then we could even consider attacking with the Necrolisk, since then if our opponent wants to double block, they would trade off their entire board, and Orizoni and Lurcher get a lot better as well. Yeah, I kind of like going for it here, since this does incentivize our opponent into trading off both creatures. And that's what we want to do here. Gonna keep the Stray back. So let's see if they double block, or if they're fine taking 5. And if we get to keep a 5/5 Necrolisk, that's fine by me. Alright, opponent takes it down to 15. So our opponent's played some pretty decent Dimir cards so far. Deadly Visit, Cover Up. They get in for 3, it's fine. Still have a Harpooner to deal with a Flyer potentially. We're 1 land away from potentially casting Izoni, but we would rather have more creatures in the graveyard first. Alright, Dowser. So we could sacrifice Generous Stray, make Necrolisk up to a 6/6. But then we're kind of in this racing scenario, which I guess is fine. We get to follow up with a big Rhizome Lurcher as well. So if we have a 6/6 Necrolisk with Menace, opponent might just double block at that point. Although it's very risky in the face of all the open mana we have. So let's say they just take it down to 9. We get to follow up with a 5/5 Lurcher, which blocks the Dowser still, so I think that's okay. And if they double block, that's fine by me. Alright, let's play a big Lurcher. And I think we'll keep land in hand. No real reason to play it out here. unless we were to draw a bunch of lands in a row. Just protect our hand from a discard effect a bit better. Alright, let's see if they have a removal spell. Another Deadly Visit. Alright, that's unfortunate. But now our Izoni's slowly powering up. The lifelink on the Child of Night's a little annoying here. But Necrolisk still threatens to potentially kill them in 2 attacks. And Izoni's gonna stabilize the board nicely here. So I think we're definitely fine attacking. And Izoni provides a ton of food for the Necrolisk as well. So we just need to dodge something like a Vapors giving -1/-1 to all the insects, but even then they would also lose a Child of Night, so I think we're okay. Could lose to something like a Maximize Altitude on the Dowser of Lights, but that's not a card you see very often in the mirror decks. So I'm liking our chances. Opponent sends in Dowser and Agent. I think we're fine trading off insects for the Agent and chump blocking the Dowser, since if we take 4, there's a number of cards that could potentially finish us off. Even though they're mostly bad cards, you never know. So is it better to trade 2 insects for the Whisper Agent or Izoni? The ability on Izoni is nice, even if we go in the late game. So I think that's slightly better, even though having more insects plays a bit better with the Necrolisk. But yeah, if they don't have anything relevant here, they're dead either way. Veiled Shade's fine. So yeah, they're gonna be chump blocking Necrolisk with 2 creatures here, which is not where they want to be. Yeah, we do want to give this Menace. Hope they don't have a 2-mana bounce spell here, but even if they do, we'll be fine. Alright, so Necrolisk putting in the work. Alright, opponent just takes lethal. It's a little strange. They could have survived another turn, but I'm not gonna complain. Sweet. Alright, so things are going pretty well so far. 5-0 with Golgari, good stuff. Let's keep it up. So what about this hand? This hand seems okay. 2 lands is a bit light, but we get to play some relevant cards early to buy ourselves a bit of time. Don't love having these expensive cards in hand, but at least that means that if we do get to the late game, we'll be favored. Turn 1 Banneret, alright. And draw another 6-drop. So don't have many expensive cards left in our deck, just the Worm. Ideally we would want to play Beetle, put the counter on another creature, and then have a 1/1 token or a 1/1 Beetle that can trade for the Banneret. I guess that's still reasonable. We could play Harpooner here. Could still keep the Harpooner to maybe answer a Legionnaire or a Hawk. They could be Izzets instead of Boros. And then we get to put the counter on the Harpooner and then trade off a 1/1 Beetle with a Banneret. I think that's okay. Alright, they are Izzets. Definitely taking it. And a Mesmerist. Alright, so the Beetle's gonna not be as effective as we would have hoped, since now the Mesmerist can shrink it down. So we have to decide if we want to go on the racing plan here, or if we just hold back. Since if we try and race, we can get in for 4, but if they start mentoring with the Banneret, things could get scary. But I guess if we just have a second Harpooner, then we can just block with the other one. There is a reason to keep the other Harpooner in hand in case of some flyers. Not sure there. Lots of options. Beam Splitter Mage, so opponent definitely on the aggressive side of things. So now what? Definitely gonna have to stay back, but now the Beam Splitter Mage is pretty scary. So do we want a 2/2 Beetle or a 1/1 Beetle and a 4/3 Harpooner? I think we spread out the counters as much as possible here. Just make a 2/2 Beetle in case of a Sonic Assault, or if they try and pump up their creatures with a Mage. We might also just want more varied number of blockers. Alright, so they could have a very scary attack here, but they're just gonna stay back. That's good for us. Gives us time to draw our lands and get to our powerful cards. So we're happy just passing the turn back. And hopefully they keep doing the same. They might have an instant here. Insight, that's a good one. So their opponent was also pretty happy to just do nothing. But yeah, I don't think we can afford to attack here. And there's a Watcher in the Mist, which we can technically still double block, and the double block would be profitable since we only lose one Harpooner to it. But I think we're just going to kill it with a Deadly Visit, so we don't have to worry about it. Could also kill the Beam Splitter Mage, but our opponent hasn't shown any tricks yet. And the Banneret I think is still manageable, so yeah, let's just kill the Watcher in the Mists, so we don't have to risk double blocking and getting blown out by an instant. And then we're just looking for lands. Midnight Reaper's tempting too, and I guess Siege Worm is also castable, so they're both pretty good here. 5. If we play Siege Worm, we have to tap 2 creatures, but a 5/5 is a pretty decent blocker. Midnight Reaper we can play by itself. If we play the Reaper first, then we don't have to tap as many creatures, so we have more blockers, so that might be better. Because then on the following turn we can play Siege Worm and have one more blocker on defense. And if our creatures do end up trading off, the Reaper draws us more cards in the meantime. Alright, opponent's gonna go for an attack here, so... Also reason to maybe keep Reaper on top, since if our opponent ends up killing most of our creatures, we will be unable to cast a Worm in the first place. So it's also possible we should have bottomed the Worm on the off chance that this happened. Normally we would be pretty happy with trading off our Harpooners because we have all the Undergrowth synergies, but because we have a Reaper coming up, we're kind of incentivized to wait until we play the Reaper before making any trades. But I also don't want to take 8 damage here. I think we do still make the trades. Don't want to block the Beam Splitter Mage because if they do have a pump spell, we end up getting wrecked. So I think this is okay. They probably have a trick, but it's only gonna kill one of our creatures for free. Right, so Sure Strike on the Beam Splitter Mage, gets in for 5. And I get to copy it on the Banneret probably. Nope, they decide to save the Mesmerist instead. Do they have a second trick? They don't. Alright, I think this is fine. Now we get to play our Reaper. So yeah, keeping the Worm on top in hindsight, maybe not the best idea. Given our hands of powerful cards, we don't need to add yet another one. So yeah, that was probably a mistake, keeping the Worm on top. Alright. Shrinks down the Beetle, we're happy trading the Reaper for the Mage. Could also block the Mesmerists, not sure which is more important here. If we block the Mesmerist and they don't have anything, then the Beetle blocks the Mage in the future. Yeah, I think this is fine. Hope they don't have another trick. They don't, sweet. So now we've got a chance of drawing a land for the Indrik. Or Izoni. Although for Izoni it would have to be a forest specifically. Alright, Halberdier's fine. Not too many things they can have to mess up the fight with Indrik. They could of course be holding a counterspell, but there's not much we can do about that one. And I prefer the Indrik over the Siege Worm here, so let's try it. Alright, they do have a Devious Cover-Up sadly, but that's okay since we've got a lot of powerful cards in hand. And they shuffled the Chemist's Insight back into their deck, which is arguably a mistake since now they can't jumpstart it, but we'll see. Opponent's got 2 cards in hand. We're happy to trade off the Beetle for anything here. And then we've got some good cards coming up if we can hit our green mana. Alright, so the downside of blocking with the Beetle here is that we don't get to play our Siege Worm. If we just take 5, we can guaranteed cast our Siege Worm next turn. Any land lets us play Giant, Forest lets us play Izoni and Siege Worm. I think we still trade. And then the question is, Mage or Halberdier? Halberdier prevents more damage, especially if we don't draw a land. We don't want to be taking 3 over and over again. So I think this is okay. Take 2 down to 9. And if they don't have any other creatures, the ability on the Beam Splitter Mage is not too relevant. So, yeah, this is okay. Alright, Lurcher is a good draw. And yeah, just any forest here would do nicely. The card I'm most worried about is something like a Sonic Assault to burn us out and open up some other attacks, or who knows, maximize altitude could be scary with the Beam Splitter Mage now, but oof, Explosion for 4. To the face, yeah. So 3 of the 3 Izzet opponents in this draft have cast Expansion Explosion, which is kind of strange. Minotaur. Alright, so yeah, keeping the Siege Worm on top I think was the mistake we made this game. Current can just burn us out now, so yeah, we're dead. That's too bad. Alright. Well, Expansion Explosion is a pretty decent card. Yeah, I wonder how this game would have played out had we bottomed the Worm. We would have had one more chance at a green source for the Zoni or for the Giant, I guess. But it would have still just drawn Expansion Explosion and burned us out, so I don't think it would have made a huge difference. Oh well, 5-1, let's keep on going. This hand seems almost perfect. We have been drawing our Reaper almost every game, which definitely helps. Given a Reaper in hand, we don't really want to trade early, so my instinct is to not trade yet. No, they don't have a turn to play. And here we have to decide between playing a Beetle or playing a tap land, so we get to play either Stray or Reaper next turn for sure, which is probably better than just playing a Beetle here. And Beetle also doesn't pump the Pelt Collector, so let's attack for 1 since we're not trading. Might as well attack, and a Righteous Blow would be fine since then they don't have a Righteous Blow for the Reaper. Play our Guild Gates. Say go, and then next turn we can decide between the Generous Stray and the Reaper. And a Rock Charger. Alright, Charger's an issue. By playing the Reaper we put a 3-2 into play, which can start pressuring the opponent a little bit more. The Beetle doesn't really do much at the moment. Generous Stray draws a land, helps us draw land, that is, which would be helping us get towards our Indrik a little bit faster potentially, but the Reaper also could potentially draw some cards. By hitting our land drop next turn we could potentially play a Necrolisk, but Necrolisk isn't necessarily better than just playing a Reaper. So in that case we might as well just play the Reaper now, so we get in for more damage next turn. Not gonna bother attacking, but... oh yeah, Harpooner would be the best draw. So maybe that's the reason to play the Generous Stray, since we improve our chances of drawing a Crawl Harpooner, which would be the best possible answer to the Rock Charger. Alright, we did hit a land drop, which is good. So now we could consider playing the Necrolisk, which also pumps the Pelt Collector. That's probably worth it. And just try and race. And we've got a Necrolisk back to block the Witness. Alright, looks like they have something. Take card, that's fine. Still get to trade. And draw a card. And perfect. And yeah, now if we put a +1/+1 counter on the Pelt Collector with our Beetle, it will also have Trample, which is relevant. Our opponent should consider attacking with the 1/1 token, since they would have gotten a 1/1 token from the Marshal attacking with 3 creatures. So they essentially would have gotten to gain 1 life for free if they attacked with the 1/1 token. So they should have considered that. Alright, so now we've got 5 lands. Can go Generous Stray plus Beetle, which gets us closer to 6 lands for the Indrik to deal with the Rock Charger, and then the game's over. Seems good to me. If we lead with the Generous Stray, we have a chance of drawing Crawl Harpooner, which would be, I guess, an even better draw, or a better play. So I guess we might as well. Alright, Pilfering Imp. Not quite. Pelt Collector has Trample. Still attacking with both, I think. We've got 2 blockers back. Opponent down to 9. I mean, we could just be winning the race without needing anything else here, but we would like to draw a land for the Indrik. Alright, so opponent now figured out they should probably be attacking with everyone. We're down to 11. And a recruit is fine. And a Deadly Visit, I guess that also works. So we just kill the Rock Charger here. And then the question is, which creatures do we attack with? I think I'm okay keeping the Necrolytic back and just attack with the Pelt Collector. So we probably want to start there. Alright. Interesting block. Maybe they have a 3 damage effect, but can't imagine any 3 damage effect here. I guess I could have the Lightning Helix, 3 damage, gain 3 life for 4 mana. Alright, Harpooner would have been nice. Definitely want land for Indrik. Question is, do we want to draw Harpooner afterwards? I mean, it's probably fine. Deals with another flyer potentially. And we can play Harpooner, Centipede and Imp in the same turn. So yeah, the way we lose a game is if our opponent has something like a Ravaging Blaze or whatever the 6 mana burn spell is called. Or if they have something like more creatures into a Cosmotronic Wave. So we do want to try and close out the game as soon as possible, given a chance. So that's what we'll try. So let's Indrik the recruit. And our opponent's facing quite a bit of pressure here. So this is going to force them to block with a Marshal, which is good. And they're going to have to chum block the Necrolytic, otherwise they're dead. Alright. Opponent's down to 2. So now I have a hard time imagining losing the game. And yeah, our opponent did have the wave, but not enough pressure to back it up. Sweet, so just a nice curve of creatures. Pelt Collector growing up to a 4/4 Trampler for 1 mana was pretty decent. Alright, so we're 6-1. Let's see if we can win the last one here. Alright, well, we keep drawing Midnight Reaper in our opening hand, not gonna complain. Yeah, this hand's great. Turn 2 Harpooner, turn 3 Reaper or Stray, turn 4 Status Statue. Almost looks like a constructed hand. Alright. So undecided about the Reaper or the Generous Stray next turn. Against Izzet. And Fire Urchin. We're definitely attacking. So land 4 doesn't necessarily do a ton for us, since we don't really want to be using Status Statue next turn anyway. So my guess is we just play the Reaper, since it gets in for a bit more damage. And I'm totally fine if they kill the Reaper with a removal spell here. Beam Splitter Mage, so another more aggressively slanted Izzet deck. And a Lurcher, so totally fine attacking with the Harpooner. Question is, do we attack with the Reaper as well? Since if we can apply a bit of pressure here to get them low, so they play more passively, that would benefit us. Staying back against the Beam Splitter Mage, not the best idea, since if they have a Pump Spell or a Trick, we get kind of wrecked. So I don't mind attacking with both. Plus we have Status at the ready as a potential Pump Spell as well. So they might just take it, and then we'll play a Generous Stray. Alright, land lets us still keep up status. So let's see if our opponent has an explosive turn here with the mage. So we could just block the Urchin with the Generous Strafe. If it dies, we still get to draw a card with the Reaper, so I think that's okay. And if they want to use a pump spell here, that's fine by me. Plus we could always use status if it benefits us. Don't want to block the mage, since I don't want to proactively have to use status on the Generous Strafe, because then we get destroyed by an opposing pump spell or removal spell. That's fine. So we both get to draw a card. Could have still used status there, but our opponent still had 2 mana up, so Sure Strike would have been quite bad for us. And another Urchin, sure. So they're scheduled to take 6 damage here, and we get to follow up with a Deadly Visit on the Beam Splitter Mage. Seems good to me. So yeah, just playing a 2 mana 3/2 and a 3 mana 3/2 backed up by a bit of removal is going to be good enough here. And just try and put a land on top. And Pilfering in the graveyard, so it bumps up our Lurchers as well. Seems good. But let's see what they have for 5 mana. At 17 life, I don't think they can kill us. It would have to take a very interesting combination of 1 mana pump spells, I guess. Alright, Sure Strike. So they're going for a lot of damage here. 7. So we're down to 10. And they probably have a Sonic Assault here. That's okay. Let's move to combat. Now we have to ask ourselves whether we want to even attack with the Crawl Harpooner or not. Putting the opponent to 2 life doesn't make a huge difference. Having an extra blocker back might be worth it. Alright, so we're at 8. Facing a single Fire Urchin, Sonic Assault, and Radical Idea in graveyard. And 3 cards in hand, and our opponent packs it in. Sweet. Alright. Didn't even need to play all the powerful cards still in hand. And we got there, so yeah. Sometimes the Golgari deck comes together. You get some of the powerful uncommons, some good removal. You get past an Izoni pretty late in the draft. Even though we didn't need to cast Izoni many times this draft. Yeah, our first pick was Midnight Reaper. We drew it in almost every game. And games of Limited tend to be just about creatures trading in combat. So if you get to draw a card whenever that happens, you're probably favored. Sweet. So that draft went pretty well. Let's crack some packs. And Loxodon's not a bad one. Definitely the pick here if this were a draft. And Izoni, well, definitely worth picking, I think. Again, this is just one of those very powerful cards that are one of the few incentives for you to jump into Golgari from the get-go, even though current is fine too. Alright, sweet. So yeah, that's gonna do it for me today. Wanna thank everyone for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also wanna thank all my patrons for being part of the channel, and you can become a patron yourself today and decide the topic of future videos over at patreon.com/LegenVD.